It's rough. It's real rough. Um, but it's just the game, unfortunately. We're not going to be able to mount really huge maneuver warfare because the tool that we use to stymie the Russians is the tool that they use to stymie us. And so we just need to get the technique down and figure it out and have superior coordination. And so that's since that's what I believe it will take to stop larger combat Russian combat operations. And since I know, unfortunately, frankly, how far we are forces wide here in Ukraine from that, I don't know. I don't believe that next year we'll see a stop of these large combat operations from the Russians.
Kevin Leach is the main director for Sabre Training Advisory Group, a professional military training non-profit that aims to give Ukrainian defenders the skills to come home alive and, it almost goes without saying, beat the invaders and expel them from their lands. Kevin is a Canadian Armed Forces veteran with a long history of working in Ukraine and in military affairs. He served as a sergeant from 2008 to 2018, specializing in armored reconnaissance. Well, let's jump into the conversation in a second. But first, I wanted to thank the audience, everyone who through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, etc., helps the channel. Of course, everyone who's subscribed. It's especially important at the moment because we're now planning the next trip to Ukraine. That will be to go to the Brave One conference and to hopefully interview some of the leading developers, technologists behind the extraordinary advances in drone, not just technology, but also tactics and the integration of those into the unmanned systems forces. So we hope to record a lot of incredible conversations there, but of course, that all comes at a price. And I am very much reliant on the audience's generosity to help make that happen. More details in the description. Kevin, welcome back.
Thank you for having me on again.
Always a pleasure. I always discover a huge amount of new stuff. And well, let's start because it's been I think it's about 6 months since our last conversation. I've been to Ukraine a few times. We actually met in January in Kiev, which was fantastic. Do you get the sense that the Russia's sort of thrown its last forces to try and get results this year? Because we're now heading into the winter when large-scale offensive operations possibly will be more difficult or not possible or not planned. Um, would you expect to see Russia, rustling up and being able to mount large-scale offensive operations next year, or are we perhaps going to see a change of dynamic by the end of the winter? Because Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities are growing. I mean, there's no question that they're growing. Um, you know, Despite the controversy around Flamingo, it's already been deployed, and it looks like the production lines are actually going to sort of kick off in quite a major way. Russia's already got fuel queues and so on. I mean, many of my speakers say, yeah, it's not going to collapse tomorrow, and they're not going to cease combat operations, but it may well be that these large scale offensives that we've seen, which has kind of petered out or failed this year, that we won't be seeing these because Russia won't be able to mount them. What's your last take on that?
Uh, I sure hope that's right. I am I'm an odd mix. I'm often very pessimistic, but also optimistic at the same time about these things. I think that we're relying on the wrong things to make that the case, that they stop these large scale combat operations. Like previously, people were relying on Russian civil society somehow materializing out of nowhere and
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
yeah, or like war frustration. The mothers going. I think again like that's no. Putin doesn't give a shit what some bereaved old
No,
woman thinks.
there's none of that. And
He's
actually, I've
seen it through.
spoken to some Russian dissident speakers to say that actually there's enough people in the system who are benefiting massively from the war that they're not going to let that gravy train end.
No, and so that's to be really concise and just give you the answer. I no, I think we're going to see the same scale of operations because they aren't running out of money, they aren't running out of men, and they're running out of some kinds of equipment, but it's stuff that they're not using as much anyway. Um, our move here has to be it's the drum that I bang pretty much every time I'm anywhere talking. We have to switch to this jujitsu style of fighting. So if we want to stop their large scale combat operations, we need to get Ukraine transferred fully into a mission command powered maneuver force. And that doesn't mean there's not going to be any static positions, but the static positions will be occupied by troops that are at ready at a moment's notice to begin advancing and begin maneuvering and really moving at with agility. And we're nowhere near that yet. Um, because the once we solve certain problems, like once we figure out like large scale like drone suppression or drone superiority, where we can shut down the Russian drone operators and then begin having like company level maneuvers. Until we've done that, we're not going to be able to mount really huge maneuver warfare because the tool that we use to stymie the Russians is the tool that they use to stymie us. And so we just need to get the technique down and figure it out and have superior coordination. And so that's since that's what I believe it will take to stop larger combat Russian combat operations. And since I know, unfortunately, frankly, how far we are forces wide here in Ukraine from that, I don't know. I don't believe that next year we'll see a stop of these large combat operations from the Russians. So it's rough. It's real rough. Um, but it's just the game, unfortunately.
Before we move on to the next question, I'd like to make a personal recommendation that I know you will appreciate. You may have seen my interview last week with the producer of the film series Kiev of Mine, Ronnie Apteker. Well, I've partnered with them to help raise awareness of what I believe is an important series of films made for a Western audience to help break through absurd stereotypes about Ukraine, some of which, of course, are amplified by Russian propaganda. You can watch these films for free now. Details in a second. Kiev of Mine is a documentary series about Ukraine's extraordinary capital, which I had the privilege to visit for the first time in January this year. The film production began in 2018, and of course, much has changed since then. It's now 2025, and the story is far from over. Kyiv of Mine is a fast-paced, beautifully filmed, humorous, fun, insightful, heartbreaking, moving, and hopeful work. The very antithesis, in fact, of a doom-laden and worthy wartime documentary. This is a work that is extraordinarily uplifting. My friend, operator Starsky, says the film is made with so much love. The film series will make you laugh and cry. It's the only film about Ukraine that began before the war yet has traced lives through the tumultuous times and which follows the lives of more than a dozen Ukrainians in real time. This is an historic period told through highly personal and emotive stories from Kiev's days of emerging prosperity after the Maidan Revolution through COVID and the full-scale invasion. This film is a breath of fresh air. Ukraine deserves a better conversation in the world, one that isn't centered around war, says Jolyon Ellis, filmmaker on Kyiv of Mine. It's hard not to argue with that, and the filmmakers have fully delivered on this promise. This is essential watching for anyone who calls themselves pro-Ukrainian, but I think it's also vital to get friends, colleagues, and family to watch it too, because the reality is few people have a vivid impression of Ukraine or any direct connection with its people. War is inhumane and abstract. Building an alternative perception is essential for engaging the world with the importance of Ukraine's struggle. What's the news on your side?
Yeah. I mean, beyond the stuff that everybody's heard of, obviously it's been a lot more active for rocket and drone attacks here. So it's meant an active year. But no, we've made huge strides here at Sabre. Um, I guess I'll just jump into the updates first of
Jump
all.
into
So
updates, and then we'll do a sort of rundown of the state of players. The so-called fighting season comes to an end. Well, I mean, there is no real downtime, but we'll maybe start talking about the success or failure of Russia's summer offensives.
yeah, that's going to be a bit of a rough one. But yeah, so just into our updates. It was a very active summer for us. We made partnerships with the new brigade. or made a partnership with a new brigade. We got obviously a lot of training done, but also for because of sort of increased support that we've had this year, I was able to make quite a long trip back to Canada in June. And so while I was there, I was asked to, well, we contacted the offices of every single MP and senator in Canadian Parliament. And so I was invited to come speak with quite a few MPs. Unfortunately, the time I was in Ottawa, the senators had legislative work to do, so I couldn't meet with any of them. But the MP meetings were pretty fruitful. They've led to an invitation for me to come and present about our work to two different groups of Conservative MPs in October. So I will have a brief trip back to Canada for that as well. But while we were there, we locked down a few things. So we've had American charities acting as fiscal sponsors for a while, but we got our first Canadian charity. So we're finally able to facilitate tax deductible donations to Sabre, which a lot of people may not realize, but in the NGO world, that's a huge thing because if you want to get support from larger donors, you need to be able to offer that because they need something in return for. I mean, if they're giving like a say $25,000 donation, that should be recognized in some way, and a tax receipt's a nice way to do that. So that was big for us. But we also began to form our advisory committee, and it's a lot of very distinguished people. Obviously, I'm not going to discuss specifics, but we have a retired major general. We have some active duty officers who specialize in training development and security force assistance, as well as an incredibly experienced philanthropist, and I would even say anti-communist. He had some very legendary adventures in the earlier in his life. I don't want to give away his identity, but he helped bring in the means by which people were producing samizdat, like underground publications within the Soviet Union and the larger communist bloc, and at risk to his life. Absolutely remarkable person, and so it's such an honor to have people like this on our on our committee and advising us and advising me personally. So it was yeah, that was just gigantic. We have, again, I can't be specific yet. We're waiting to sign the memorandum of understanding, but we have laid out the groundwork for a partnership with an officer school here in Kyiv. So something I've talked about in the past is the need to modernize and Ukrainianize leadership training here in Ukraine, and this is going to let us address that particular problem at its root. The staff of the officer school are very forward thinking. They reached out to us, which was incredibly humbling and also encouraging. And so I think it's going to be probably the sort of crowning achievement of the organization so far is to get us in that position and start turning out regular training of these junior officers. We also I was fortunate to have the opportunity to meet with a brigadier general from NATO's NSAT-U, which is it's NATO support and training for Ukraine, something like that. I forget what the acronym stands for, but they coordinate. So for those people that don't know, NATO is not actually providing the training. It's not, the organization itself doesn't do that. It's the member states that provide the training. What NATO does is coordinate. Okay, so you guys are going to do this training here. You guys are going to do that training there, talking to the different member state governments. And so I had 2 hours with this general, which is he's incredibly generous with his time. And I was able to really understand how they worked, and then what was good for us too is how we can make sure that everything Sabre's doing is aligned with what they're doing so that we are creating that maximum interoperability. And there's even some follow-up work that I've got to do with them just to get us more in line. But it's again, it's part of our to brag a little, it's part of our dedication to professionalism because it's always been my goal for Sabre to have kind of I would say a state level actor effect, and getting to know these people and building these relationships is a big part of how we're going to do that.
And the need
Um,
hasn't declined in any sense, has it? If anything, the need has gone up because
yes,
some of the people who, essentially got training on the job since 2014, of that generation, well, a lot of people have passed, unfortunately. A lot of the more active people who were also involved in Euromaidan, Revolution of Dignity, they were some of the first to volunteer. So there's a constant need, I guess, to train a new generation, new cohorts of soldiers up.
it is, and because we don't have the luxury of say throwing out en masse the Soviet trained officers, we have to instead create a critical mass of trained soldiers who understand the um, Western or NATO or Allied way of war, especially things I always bang on about it, but mission command, proper coordination, proper training. These are and using NCOs and not just having sergeants around, but actually using them as sergeants. These are the things that we want to propagate. And what's good is that is being seeded into Ukrainian forces from on multiple fronts. So you have, of course, Azov Corps, you have Third Army Corps. Those probably are the two big headliners that are pushing modernized training and these concepts into the Ukrainian military. As a friend of mine in Third Army Corps put it, we're going to lead the way and drag the rest of the army with us. And more often than not, that's how it's done in the Canadian Army, for example. There is a sort of renowned infantry regiment called Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, PPCLI. We've had a few instructors come from them, and they're always incredible. But they do that. They do a lot of the internal innovation for the Canadian Army, and then disseminate those lessons to the rest of the Canadian military. So it's there's of course there's always difficulty. There's no part of war that's easy, but there's a lot of encouraging signs, which is very important uh, in the current moment.
And
I mean, sorry.
training's a tricky one, isn't it? Because, and it'd be interesting to see the comparison with Western forces here. When you have, let's say, and I know if you come from an infantry background, you're going to say, okay, drones have their role, but they're not going to replace everything. There isn't that sort of magic bullet. However, they have become an essential part of sort of integrated or combined drone approach to warfare, along with armored vehicles and all the rest of it. The trouble is the iterations of the hardware and software are happening on an almost weekly basis. What are the implications, therefore, for training, not just having basic drone integrated training with recruits, but actually this constant need to update and iterate hardware and tactical skills?
So there's good news and bad news. Bad news to that. The bad news is that yeah, the operators themselves are going to have to be constantly staying on top of the technological advances. But Ukrainians are really good at that. Ukrainian drone companies are phenomenal, and the kind of people that are drawn to um, drone combat, I mean, it's typically pretty smart, tech-oriented people, and so they stay abreast. The good news is that drones, so yeah, people overblow it, especially I hate the term game changer. It drives me nuts. Um, the introduction of drones is like the introduction of machine guns. It is a new capability which it's understood. Like a machine gun was understood in that I know a machine gun bullet functions the same as a musket ball when it hits somebody. Um, it's the employment and integration, and so we're working out how to employ and integrate these capabilities, but also how to defend against them. This is something I delivered a proposal to Department of the National Guard headquarters. Probably it's going to have to wait until we're better resourced to fully exploit this opportunity. But the idea is to put together a um, kind of like a development group for drone tactics, but also countermeasures. and empirically test things. So people have seen soldiers out there with shotguns. Um, there's been lots of, you see like those little net launchers where it's like a pistol. A friend who used one said he never will again because it almost broke his wrist because it's firing a blank rifle cartridge in a pistol form, which for people that don't know, that delivers a lot more recoil to your body than would a pistol cartridge, and in that case can have these we'll say injurious effects if you're not careful. But anyway, they're at least not that I have encountered. There's not an empirical process for testing these things, these drone countermeasures, and so we have to figure that kind of thing out and actually approach it scientifically. Once we do that, then we can start to really translate the lessons learned in the ground into what we call TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Um, but that's again, at least in our case, that'll have to wait until we've got much more in the way of resources. Um, it's just a reality of running things as an NGO.
We discussed way back when we first did an episode, we discussed the real issue, which is that Western militaries are either not embedded enough in Ukraine or are just not really observing what's going on at close quarters and not learning the lessons of this dramatically evolving warfare, especially if the impact is as significant as something like the introduction of the machine gun. We know what that led to in the First World War. And when both sides to simulate that technology, it led to mass slaughter. Um, if one side steadfastly refused to learn the lesson of that mechanized warfare, they would have been absolutely annihilated, even if they had the very best skills in the previous war and its equipment and tactics.
Mhm.
Is this changing now? Are you seeing Western military starting to observe more, embed more, and internalize some of these issues, and then start to trickle that down into their, training programs?
So, uh, yes and no. Anyone that likes military history will know that this always happens at the scale of individual national militaries, even sometimes between branches. So, I know for a fact that there is at least one U.S. Army officer who has been given some set of resources and a group of soldiers with which he and his team are just experimenting with the tactics that are used out here. And so that's real cutting edge. I know that the U.S. Marine Corps has started thinking about this sort of thing. If we cross over into Canada, it's a bit of a different picture. So Canada, the Canadian military is struggling with a recruiting and retention problem, and there is unfortunately we're a few steps behind. I have a friend who is working on a program to acquire new helicopters, and it's not that I don't subscribe to the helicopters are obsolete belief that they're not, but we do need to change the way that we use them. And the issue is that right now in the Canadian Army, drones are still viewed in the way that they were 20 years ago. Like this is a big expensive asset. It flies way up above us, and like people are still stuck in the global war on terror era. Um, I can't comment any closer on, say, the British, German, French militaries. I don't know what they are and are not picking up. But it's this stuff I think is always very sporadic until the need becomes so pressing that it can no longer be ignored. And I think I mean we part of what we want to do with Sabre is to fire lessons learned back to our home nations and get these lessons learned ahead of time and frankly reduce the blood price that's going to be paid for them in a future conflict. But that's a difficult process. Just if for no other reason than a lot of times when it's getting better obviously with the reputation that Sabre's building, but if I walk into a room and people don't know necessarily about Sabre and I start telling them things, they go, "Oh, this is a very precocious sergeant." It's so funny that he thinks he can speak on this. And it's like, well, yes, I actually got quite frosty with someone where I had to specify I was a sergeant. Since then, I have grown beyond that role by necessity, and I also, yeah, I'm a sergeant who has friggin' majors working. I won't say working for me, but working with me, mentoring me. I've got even, yeah, retired generals who are helping providing insight and leadership, um, what should I say, leadership training informally. So, it's tough. It's tough to say that the lessons being picked up widely, but at least in pieces here and there it is. And I can say from talking to the defense attaches that I've spoken to here, they all become very aware of these lessons when they come out here. In the Canadian case, they usually rotate every 6 months to a year. And so that means that you're actually getting a pretty high throughput of attaches. And these are officers from various backgrounds in the Canadian military. So it's a complex question, but one that I think is, again, it's more hopeful than it is negative. I think we just need to increase the rate at which these lessons are being brought back, um, and that it remains to be seen if we're going to be able to. I think, if I got everything I asked for, and I had $1 million a year budget and was able to make regular trips back to Ottawa and, for example, put on lessons learned seminars and uh, invite various officers and other decision makers, then we would be able to spread that a lot faster. But unfortunately, at the moment, I don't have the means to do that, and that's another thing that we just really struggle with. So it's a battle. It's a battle within the war, just getting these lessons learned.
And this is the, say, unresolved question, which I think is in the mind of anyone who's been following, Europe's relatively slow start in rearming. That is certainly picking up pace now. But it seems that a lot of efforts, even within NATO, or especially within NATO, is what I would call Trump management. Just trying to contain the chaos while perhaps behind the scenes, doing stuff that's perhaps more impactful. But this is the big question. If you have a NATO force which actually is reasonably well equipped to fight the last war, and has these, lots of shiny equipment, etc., but has not done a huge amount of training or necessarily got on that evolution loop of electronic warfare, various drone tactics, etc. What would happen when that force meets an aggressive Russian rabble army that has, in parts, in pockets, actually assimilated some of this drone warfare, or in some senses evolved it when you look at the fly-by-wire?
Oh, yeah. That's a rough one. I mean, there's a lot of people. They're very doomerish, I'll say, where they're predicting like a total defeat of the Western forces by Russia. That's not realistic. There's certainly reason to be negative because there will be an incredible attrition rate, something that we in the West have not dealt with since the Second World War, well, since Korea. Um, maybe in the case of America since Vietnam, but I don't really know the casualty rates there. Anyway, the point is, like I believe Canada lost 158 soldiers in Afghanistan, and basically, if you have a Canadian brigade, and it has anyway, it's, close enough to how we organize. Anyway, you send a Canadian brigade, right, or a combat team, right, and they are geared up for even conventional warfare, the way that we've trained. There's definitely going to be a certain number of those troops that are very successful because they are so integrated into the mission command and sort of, I would say, like independent or autonomous operation that they're able to strike deeply into the Russians. However, okay, logistics is going to be devastated because that is the by far the most vulnerable part of any military, and we are not prepared for the porosity of the front line that drone warfare has introduced, because it's nothing like once upon a time, if you wanted to ambush a supply convoy, you had to find a way to get usually kind of special forces or elite infantry um, inserted somehow into the enemy rear area. Let's just think about like World War II, right? And maybe paratroopers, OSS, maybe irregular forces. Now there's like that those all have a high barrier of entry because you actually really need to prepare those forces. Now the barrier of entry is incredibly low because you take a few weeks, you train someone to fly a drone, and doesn't matter how dumb he is, he can fly that drone in a straight line over to where your logistic routes are and blow up a truck that has like, oh, there goes the company's supply of food for the month. Oh shit, right? So it's in some ways, we are completely ready to fight. I mean, sorry, we being Western forces are ready to dominate even against Russians. In other ways, there are these glaring vulnerabilities that are are being seen and addressed. You see a lot of officers now are talking about the need to bring back gun-based air defense systems. And now you have these, like the Sky Shield or something, that German it's like from a video game, but like a turret on the ground, and it's radar guided, and that kind of thing. Because Western forces have the resources, they can mobilize and get stuff like that going quickly. In the case of full scale war, were Western economies to switch to war economies, and instead of making fucking labubus or whatever luxury items, we went back to something like like Singer. Instead of making sewing machines, they start making pistols. If we did something like that again, we would very rapidly overwhelm the Russians because there is better production in the West. But anyway, without going too long into that, to answer your question briefly, there would be a huge price to be paid. So the kind of losses that we saw in the war on terror era, the total losses would be those total losses that we view as this enormous tragedy would become daily losses, at least in the initial opening part of that larger conflict, as our forces caught up to how things have changed.
So we're getting back to
Uh,
career and allied kind of losses in World War II. And of course, if you look at American, British, Canadian, and Australian losses, as a ratio of what, say, the Soviet Union and Germany lost, of course, we're far better at being economical with the lives of our troops, but still, the losses were were immense, and as you say, we're not used to that in the modern era.
yeah, and the that just that one a brief note on that ratio, because I mean it's one of those things the Russians fucking bang out about constantly. They lost as many people as they did. First of all, they're counting civilian deaths as military deaths, and they lost so many people because of terrible mismanagement and the regular disadvantages that come with I mean that not the regular okay, the disadvantages that come with authoritarian systems where you feel very free in pursuit of some kind of transcendental utopia to spend the lives of people, because what price is too much for heaven on earth. And that's, I mean, the Nazis suffered from the same I would say they suffered under the same general philosophy of authoritarianism, and then them having to fight a two-front war is what explains their ratio.
Mm.
But then, you know, we again, something that the Russians completely just take for granted. Like, we're getting better at not taking the Eastern Front for granted, but the Russians are absurd in how they just hand wave away Operation Overlord. Like, yeah, it must have been real easy. Oh, are you kidding? It goes to show the difference, right? The Soviet Union and the Russians, they do everything in this blunt way, not always human wave attacks, but always blunt. and the West is considered an economical, and it really is. It's a comparison I've made in other contexts, but it is really the difference between a steamrolling boxer versus a calculating a Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter. So, uh, but no, to come back to the original point, we're our societies may not be prepared for the shock that comes with full-scale war. And especially considering that we have a significant internal fifth column of especially the kind of failed comedian podcasters, like a Dave Smith figure. We have these people eroding the ties within our society, and there's many other things that are having that effect. But you could just imagine you have a thousand Tokyo roses blooming, and within Western society. So there are there is of course the direct military things to consider in how this is, I mean, a larger conflict. And then there's the social effects, and what the hell will that mean? Having someone that absolutely that while living in, I'm just going to use Dave Smith as an example, while living in New York City, espouses politics that are unlike anything he could find in that state or city, and constantly constantly decries the United States as a nation and every action that it carries out. Um, would he change his tune if America was attacked? There's no reason to believe that, because I think most of these people are probably in some way. The Tenet Media scandal showed that a lot of these people are just taking money straight from the bloody Russian government, and that's leaving aside the money that the Chinese Communist Party and the Iranian regime um, pump into the West as well, often via uh, intermediaries like Qatar, in the case of Tucker Carlson, if I'm going to be naming names.
And we have our own figures in Nigel Farage, who, he understands that actually the overall support for Ukraine is high in the UK, and the impact of Russian narratives is not always, the obvious propaganda narratives don't necessarily cut through. It's the subtext narratives, I think, that do cut through. When we talked about before we hit the video, one is Russia is mighty and it's big and it's powerful and it's inevitable. So, yeah, we can carry on fighting, and we're not doing the fighting. We can carry on fighting, but the outcome is predetermined. That's a classic one. That really does unfortunately cut through. And the other one, of course, is that people are dying. Whereas it's, an invader is killing its victim, which is a better framing of it, rather than people are dying. But that's a favor of Elon Musk and those who use supposed altruism to do what in effect is appeasement, surrender, and acquiescence to genocide. And then the third one, and this is the one that we'll see, I think, Farage deploying, he wouldn't actually come out and say what I actually think he believes, which is that he's aligned with authoritarians and wants to line his own pockets. And he'd love to come out and say, do you know what? Putin's a great guy. He'd love to say some of the things that Trump actually says, but he won't get away with it in Britain. What he'll come out with, and he'll say is, well, we've got a lot of problems. Okay, there's a lot of bad stuff in the world. We can't fix it all. We got to focus on our own problems. And unfortunately, there's the element of truth in that, although our problems won't get any better if Europe is overrun by Russian invaders, or Ukraine is overrun. But that unfortunately will get traction. It's a quite an insidious type of propaganda that is wrapped up in supposed altruism, which the intention is the complete opposite.
It's stop the killing. We need to stop the killing. One thing that's bothered me is I actually used to listen to a lot of podcasts, and what I noticed is that especially through like the COVID era, and then now it's just stayed. It's like the podcast world in the West has just become podcasters talking to podcasters. That's one of the reasons I really like. I mean, not to kiss your butt too much, but it's one of the reasons I like your shows. You talk to people that do things. And the what you see a lot when these podcasters discussing podcasts about their podcasts, they when they make reference to the war here, they're like, well, yes, of course, Ukraine is going to have to make concessions because it's important to stop the killing. And that's just a completely I understand where they're coming from, but it's because they've never been here. They don't really have much of a grasp of things here. Some of them, like Michael Malice, Konstantin Kisin, like they have people that they know here, maybe family members or whatever, but they don't really grasp it because you can surrender, you can cede all sorts of things to the Russians. That doesn't stop the killing. We worked with a young woman. She's about 21 years old. She was an interpreter for us, and she left Donetsk in the city Donetsk in 2021. So she and her family lived there for quite a few years under occupation. And what she described to me was sounded a lot like South Korea. Like you cannot they have of course their rump government, but you can't criticize it
Yeah,
because people will be
correction there, North Korea, not South. South Koreans going, "Oh, what's he talking about?"
did I oh Jesus, did I say South Korea?
Yeah, we're talking about the Kim Jong-un kind of, military parade
Yeah.
kind of
No,
gulag kind
sorry.
of place. Yeah.
No, yeah, clearly I meant North Korea. Anyway, damn. But the point it's this you have the the repression doesn't stop. The killing doesn't stop. They purged uh, society there. Anyone that was openly pro-Ukraine was imprisoned or murdered. And the this is continuing, and it will get worse. The more that Russia is handed, and the what everyone seems to kind of just gloss over is the effect on global and especially regional stability that will have like the devastating effect that will come out of basically building another North Korea uh, inside of Europe. And so that stop the killing meme just it has to be fought. Uh, I think people from our side need to get into these information spaces however they can and start injecting the I guess counter narrative or reality. And that's one thing that something to be optimistic about is, for example, Ben Shapiro really coming out on the I would say on the pro-Ukrainian side, and in a very tempered way. Like he's not foaming at the mouth like I would be. Um, so there's signs of hope even on that, but of course it's up to us to get out there and spread that message. Um, it's we just got to keep doing what we're doing, I guess.
I'm a sort of, a soft centrist liberal, as they say in the UK, um, and uh, and yet, I've got common ground with people who think of themselves as quite traditional conservatives or more radical conservatives, um, and not just on Ukraine, on the ideas of how freedom and innovation are central, and how we have a real freedom of speech problem, or at least we have a problem in handling freedom of speech and differentiating between hate speech. And these are complex issues. We have a problem, which if it goes unacknowledged, um, is going to get worse, and it's going to give people a sense they're disenfranchised, and then they're going to go for populist radical solutions, which just make the problem worse. So I think that sort of finding that commonality is extraordinarily important. I mean, Ben Shapiro is someone I'd be very keen to get on the channel to talk about it, whose political views generally are complete at variance with mine, but it would be an interesting conversation. Konstantin Kisin, again, I object to so much of his framing and packaging and the sensationalism behind parts of it. And yet, I find myself actually thinking he has an interesting point on many things. And I think that idea of being challenged, even if you don't agree with the person's point of view, is something a lot of people have got out of the habit of doing. And social media actually discourages you from seeking out information that moves you out of your comfort zone. and makes you feel actively, you know, uncomfortable and challenged. That's a key problem we've got at the moment.
That's it. I mean, that even gets at something larger that's kind of plaguing our societies now, which is it's going to go people goes it goes by many different terms. You have the sort of attention economy, right? And you have stuff like TikTok, Instagram Reels, the incredible short format 10-second videos that are shredding people's they're not only are they're shredding people's attention span, they lend themselves to more extreme points of view, and then it leads to a kind of spiral where rather than actually digging deeply into a topic, something that's complex and contentious, people go for these frankly dumbass sound bites, and they enter a spiral of extremism, and it doesn't like it goes in every conceivable political direction on every single issue. And that is a complex of crises that our societies have to face because we're like it's for money now. Like the I remember back when I was in university and there were these debates on free speech, and I was in my university's free speech club, and it all at the time it all seemed like things will go, it'll come to some head, and then it'll start to attenuate, and people will I don't know, rebuild common ground. Uh, that hasn't happened. I was far
In
more
fact, it's
optimistic.
spiraled completely the other way. I mean, I'm old enough
Yeah.
like you to remember when the conversation around the internet is that this is going to be pure benefit, it's going to be pure altruism, it's going to transform learning, transform mankind. Whereas actually, it's physically changing people's brains to not be able to be critical information, not to be able to absorb long form information, or even, have a reasoned debate in the real world.
That's one that I will say that I've had really good luck, not good luck, good results talking to people face to face, and having to provide a little optimism. Even people that I think so. I don't mention it every single time, but I am I'm a pretty serious Catholic, and people can people can infer from that whatever the hell they want. But I have my values, right? And there are many people that I speak with who have different values on a number of different, let's say contentious issues. And I I'm not going to go on some kind of crusade to make everyone believe what I do, especially if we hold in common views on say freedom, on Ukraine, and what I've seen is like you come out here and there's just incredible coalitions of people that probably would not be able to agree on let's say like domestic Western issues, but they're able to put those quarrels aside in order to focus on the larger objective. And that's like I think that is very good, and it's the in-person interactions are the best ones. Um, on the larger issue, I've seen actually some. It's going to sound it's weird, and I'll explain why it's optimistic. But I think I've seen people make the case that the sort of AI slopification of the internet is actually going to drive people back out of the internet space and more into the real world where like I can't trust any review that I find online, so I actually have to go into a store, handle an item before I decide to buy it. I need to speak to someone who's in person who has experience using that item. And so I think that there's good and bad, but definitely like the attention span shredder, stuff like TikTok, the way that it's affecting especially youth, I think that's just become a new evolutionary pressure. And that, what that means downstream, who knows just yet. But I think there's just going to be a certain number of people that just never learn to interact with anyone, and so they never, no matter their other traits, they never meet someone, get married, have children. And so we're now after we'll say centuries of near immunity to natural selection pressures, we have introduced some unnatural man-made selection pressures which are having this effect on our, and they have massive effects, not just like globally, of course, and on the scale of our societies and individually. I know that I don't have anything like the attention span that I did when I was 15, 16, which is fucking, I mean, that's saying something. What I don't have the attention span of a teenager, good God. But no, I mean, it comes from, too much of that exposure. We're going like
Well,
far
I,
afield now,
I
but
just have to look at the stats of the channel. I mean, people won't necessarily be aware of what the stats are. I mean, when you look at channels that are related to military topics or, dare I say, hardware and all that kind of stuff, or even sort of gun culture, I mean, it tends to be 90% male. That's just the profile, and that's kind of typical. My channel is about 80% male, so it's a slight improvement on that. But it tends to be that geopolitical topics are more angled towards males than females. We got 30% US, but it's the demographics, it's the age group that is really stunning. The average age is 65, and I think this comes from not just the fact that people who are slightly older have more time on their hands. That's probably true. It not even the fact that they're probably more politically active, which I think many of them are, and that's why I think it's a good audience to reach. It's because they were brought up on newspapers, they're brought up on long form content, and they were brought up in an era where most of the publications were in effect, they may have labeled themselves as left, right, and whatever, but many of them were reality centered and were actually a lot closer on issues and were, there wasn't so much commercial incentive to weaponize narratives and headlines and your political framing. That wasn't the main monetization factor for that media environment. And of course, there was more regulation, one has to say as well.
mm,
But I think there's a lot of stuff that's sort of driving that apart. My fear here is that if those who are younger than 50 are really not engaging with geopolitics, or if they are, they're doing it via TikTok, God forbid, then we've got a deeply yes, a deeply odd sort of view of the world, a
mm.
deeply non-reality based one, which is pretty damn scary. I'll let you have a word on that one, and then we'll talk in the final sort of segment about what's happening on the front and Russia's supposed summer offensive.
Yeah. So the attention shredder and its consequences are a disaster for our civil society, to paraphrase a famous anti-technologist terrorist. But yeah, it remains to be seen. Like we're out on the edge of this. The Overton window. For those people that don't know, that's say the window of what's considered acceptable politics. It has been blown wide open. You're seeing stuff said openly in public fora that would have, I mean, it would have finished careers 20 years ago, maybe even less, 10 years ago. And that's an indication that people are, I mean, some of this, yeah, a lot of this is caused by new technology and the attention shredder and all this other stuff. But some of the other things are just caused by the end of the kind of golden summer that was the post World War II era, and the total domination of the, especially coming from the 90s, the total domination of uh, Western democracies over the world. Um, because it is like it's for various reasons there is decline there. There's certainly decline in influence, and people are getting due to many different crises. People are getting frustrated by uh, the sort of stable old system. I mean, I can even say that it's like someone at the age that I'm at. I'm 36, and I'm not, so I'm not exactly young, but I'm also not exactly old. But I know from a lot of my peers, like nobody has the only people I know who have any hope of owning a home. Well, one already does. They do that because they make a lot of money. And when I say make a lot of money, I mean like one is making seven figures with the job that he's got. The other had a large sum paid in compensation from the military and was able to and is in lucrative employment. But the sort of, I would say, regular, like, baseline people that I know who are closer to the median, they just they don't have such an ambition. And then you think, like, okay, what does that mean for their prospects of marriage? What does it mean for their prospects of having a family? Um, Aggregate that, because they're not just alone in this, and there's a number of people across our societies in the same situation. Like, we are seeing the culmination of many different decades long policy and cultural trajectories that are now, uh, it's kind of like loose pieces in an engine. They shake and shake and shake, and they get looser, which allows more play in the other pieces, and then you have eventually the thing starts to shake itself apart. And it remains to be seen if we've reached the terminal extent of that shaking apart. Um, I hope so, but yeah, it's definitely something that we've got to confront, because if we don't, it only gets worse. People don't. One thing that I'll say is that people take order for granted, and I don't. When I say order, I mean, like, not law, not government. I mean your neighbor not kicking down your door to steal your canned food. Order. And people really take it for granted. And you go, like, like, anarchists think it's complete, order is totally spontaneous, and we're all logical, rational players, and my neighbor will calculate that it's not good for him to steal my canned food. It's like, okay, that's great. Tell that to human history, because um, that's not the case. And we've taken that order for granted, and I think, to a certain degree, we have stopped maintaining it. And now we're paying the consequences. And we have to, in a number of different areas, we have to start really being clear-eyed and assessing the situation rationally, objectively, without imposing our ideals. We should only talk about what is, not what should be, because what should be is a transcendental thing, okay? And it only matters once it's instantiated, brought into existence. What matters far earlier is what is. If I want to build a house, I can say, yes, there should be solid ground beneath this house. But if I try building on frigging quicksand, thinking only about what should be, well, it will have immediate consequences for the success of my house building. So anyway, I kind of mangled that. It wasn't as concise as I wanted to be, but there we
Yeah.
are.
No, I think important topic, and it builds on the previous conversations that we've had. Um, Now for this big target, I think this is the last one we're going to broach here, but I think certainly Putin had huge overinflated expectations from what has been billed as his summer offensive. Certainly, they scraped together additional forces. And at certain points, they've pushed all the way along the front, but they've also concentrated. When they didn't get big breakthroughs in the south, they concentrated on Sumy. They've been pushed back there. What is the characterization of Russia's strategy? Can we call it a success? And if we judge that Ukraine has successfully pushed back, what, however, is the price of that resistance? And when we see Pokrovsk hasn't fallen, rather Russian forces have lost ground. We see that they've been pushed back in Sumy and other places. What's the overall sense of what you've seen this year?
That's one where I have a hard time being optimistic. I have a friend who's fighting. Well, I have a few friends fighting in the Pokrovsk sector, but one in particular that I'm in regular contact with. And it's like, we have had limited success. We've had success in stopping Pokrovsk from falling. That's okay. But the Russians have dominated the area. Moving in that area is incredibly unsafe. This friend in particular used to be dropped off at position by a vehicle, but now has to ruck in, um, just because the Russians have fire control of the whole area. Um, we've made limited success. We've had limited success in retaking some of the places that Russians have taken, some of the ground. But overall, the Russians, month on month, are taking more and more square kilometers. So it might not be something that people want to hear, especially among the audience for your podcast. But I would say that the Russian summer offensive, not an overwhelming success, not something that met its hoped for goals, but I mean, they have more land now than they did before, and that's been the case for a while. Like they have been gaining. They're when Sabre started working, we did a lot of training in the east, um, and there was a little village called Dolnya, which was close to it was west of Marinka, and all of that, all of that area, all the place that we lived, basically right up to Pokrovsk now, because it was east of Pokrovsk. That's all held by the Russians now. That wasn't the case in 2022 and 2023. So it's a tough one, but it just lends to my mind. It just puts in more urgency that we here in Ukraine need to have to tie it back to what I know the most. We need to have this Valley Forge moment where, for those people that don't know, Valley Forge, it refers to a town that George Washington holed up in with the Continental Army. I forget which winter it was, but it was through a winter during the American Revolution, and they had had some really crushing defeats, and morale was very low. And he brought in I want to say Prussian officer. I don't recall the name, but this fella came in and overhauled the training system, instituted a lot of like traditional military discipline, which a lot of people scoff at, but is important. That doesn't mean doing drill. That means making sure your gear is clean, and that you're where you need to be when you need to be there. Anyhow, uh, at Valley Forge, they overhauled the training system, retrained a lot of the soldiers, and when the Continental Army came out of Valley Forge, and any Americans will forgive me if I'm screwing up the facts here because I'm not American. But anyway, when they came out of Valley Forge, it was almost like a new military, and that was where they were able to retake the momentum and to eventually with eventually liber well I don't know what's going to be contentious for everyone here caring about these old politics. But anyway, they liberated America and then were able to achieve independence. But we need that here in Ukraine. We need that. We got to hit that point of sobering realization that we can't just keep creating new brigades and uh, pulling Jesus Murphy, pulling people from the air defense units and putting them into the infantry. Um, Something that is, again, I don't want to be overly contentious and hurt people's feelings or something or make people mad, but I walk around Kiev and there's tons and tons and tons of able-bodied men. Um, at some point, I really need to start. I just kind of want to start asking, like, what is your freedom worth to you? Because what are you doing, man? And then people could say, yeah, Kevin, well, you're not fighting, but that's okay. And I kind of laugh that off because my organization's trained like 4,000 Ukrainian troops. So I'm not, I won't say happy, but secure in the contribution that I'm making through Sabre. But I look at these other people and I think like, okay, like are you paying a lot of money into the military? Are you volunteering? And in a lot of cases, the answer is just going to be no,
Like I
which
stance is no. I mean, I have a lot of personal friends who are or who have transitioned from that very active civilian life to eventually join the military, but on their terms, joining the regiment where they can have most impact based on their skills. And I think that would be the judgment, wouldn't it? Okay, if you're not going to physically go into the trench, what are you doing for a victory? Are you spending your weekends, sewing camo netting? Are you helping to program drones? Like a friend of mine called Rick, he does a stream every single day, uh, and he raises an extraordinary amount of money. Each stream isn't going to raise tens of thousands of dollars, but it might be three, four, $5,000 every time he goes online, and he has these long chats, and he brings on people from different battalions. He brings on volunteers. He has this constant kind of delivering information, but auction. It's all about auctioning patches and flags, and he raises extraordinary awareness and money. It's like, well, if everyone was doing that, then it's like it's not a get out of jail free card, but it's like people are deploying their skill. to have the greatest impact. And that's great. But if they're just swanning around coffee shops, hanging out in Lviv croissants or whatever it is, I'm afraid I'm a bit judgy. I judge people in London as well. I go to these swanky events that try to, raise money for Ukraine. And there's a lot of able-bodied men there. And you have to think, yeah, you've bought an expensive ticket to come to this event. What else are you doing?
Yeah, it's a tough one because well, it's tough and it is and it isn't because like I'm not I believe in certain things. Like the lot of the infantry must be improved. The way the amount of let me say the acidic and awful Soviet influence on the Ukrainian military and the way that the infantry is treated is just like it's just slot people and you shovel them into a hole in the ground and they stand there until they're killed. That seems to be the attitude of many officers, which is fucking stupid. Pardon me for swearing, but it makes me like I was not an infantryman when I was in the military, but I in my time came to understand the significance of the infantry and to view what can be what it well first of all to view what is the core of your military. That's the case throughout time and will never change. Um, to view it as just like a kind of expendable expendable resource is it's abominable, but it's leaving so much money on the table. We just to talk about it about our work a little bit. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on the podcast before, but so in the summer of 2023 we had 2 months to work with 100 National Guardsmen. And so we were able to get them from the level of like assessing their individual skills and then filling the gaps that we needed to, and then building them up through sort of squad level planning and operations, platoon level planning and operations, and we culminated in just doing like by the end of it, we were just doing company level exercises with them, giving them objectives, watching the platoons plan, watching the squad leaders plan, and then they carried it out, and we would just give them, okay, this has happened, so you need to react. Anyway, just a very, very simple from the standpoint of the work that we do, a very simple intervention led to for that company, a 60% reduction in casualties compared to their neighboring companies. They were fighting in Serbrunsky Forest after they worked with us. So it was hard fighting. And they took 60% fewer casualties than their neighboring companies. And not just did they take fewer casualties, but they had a much lower ratio of people killed to wounded. They had 30 in the first combat deployment, 30 wounded and 6 killed. And that is drastically lower than the norm out here. And it's not because we did anything magical. It's just because we took these infantry and we treated them like Western infantry and we trained them the way that we would in Western infantry and prepared them to fight insofar as they would be able to in the environment they're in the way that ours do. And so things like when you've been drilled 100 times on casualty evacuations, you're better at it. Okay, I have to have some of my guys firing so that I can actually drag this person from the point that he's been wounded. Because if I just run like in a movie and go grab him, I'm going to get shot too. And so I understand completely young men that avoid rolling the dice and ending up in the infantry here because you could, if you're really lucky, you get randomly assigned to 3rd Assault Brigade, and you end up with very competent commanders and good training. Or if you're unlucky, you're in some triple digits uh, meat platoon, which has been reconstituted 7 times because the colonel in charge, who never goes any closer than 40 kilometers to the front line, truly does not care what happens to the people under his command. And so there's a duty for people to serve the nation, but there's also a duty for the nation to ensure that they're prepared properly. And I have we've had a little correspondence with Come Back Alive, in particular, now formerly of Come Back Alive, but one of their statisticians. Um, he was the lead on a program that looked at the levels of motivation in Ukrainian conscripts. And they came to the same conclusion that we did by observing training, which is that it needs to be improved. But they actually got the empirical data and they showed how, motivation starts out pretty low. And then the person, the guy gets conscripted The motivation goes up because he realizes, well, I'm here, so I might as well survive. Uh, then he starts his training and the motivation drops because unfortunately the quality of the training is often not there. And so this is, to not to be too gratuitous, but this is an appeal for organizations like ours, because the more we can do, the more resources we get, the more relationships we build here inside of Ukraine, the more of a positive effect we can have, and make sure that when this training is conducted, it's actually done well, and the soldiers are prepared, and it's we've got to get them home alive. We A lot of people want to talk about what's going to happen after support for veterans. And whenever they want to involve me, I tell them the same thing, which is my support for veterans is ensuring that soldiers live long enough to be veterans. Um, it it we everyone kind of wants to clean up the party before it's done, and it's like, no, we have to finish this thing, and then we'll talk about recovery. But anyway, I really rambled there, but this stuff touches directly on my work and our work, so it's close to me.
It has been incredibly instructive. It's always a pleasure speaking, Kevin. Thank you so much for coming back on. And
Likewise.
yeah, let's do this with a bit more frequency because I think the audience find such tremendous value listening to voices of yours that are, as you say, that are actually in action, that are doing things, that are there on the ground, rather than just sort of talking heads, endlessly recycling, a bunch of hollow cliches. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, as always.
A final word from our partners, the makers of Kiev of Mine. All three films are now available to watch for free on YouTube. Please check out the links to the dedicated website, which tells you more about the film, its subjects, and the filmmakers. Also in the description is a link to the YouTube channel where you can watch the films now. Do let us know in the comments what you think of them and if they inspire you as much as they have inspired me.